thing is, the question is, as you mentioned at the start, that this is not the finished article, and it looks like it isn't. It's more like work in progress. My biggest suggestion is that you should try to expand that concept, a right to memory. What is a right to memory, and why we should have a right to memory? I'm not sure we should have a right to memory, and what are the consequences of that right. And I think you should put that in introduction, because you are starting with all the topics you mentioned in presentation: origins, individuals, collectives, all the memory studies reference. Maybe you have even too much references, or almost every sentence you have like few references. So I won't suggest any literature for you, because half of article is literature. Another question: what would be a right to memory in digital era? What's that right? Why do you think we should have that right? And why should we have control of our digital memory also, is the question. Because maybe that could damage us more, that we don't have any control. And if you want us and to have more control, maybe you should expand that part. Why we need more control over private corporations that manage our memories. You mentioned that in one or two sentences only. I think when you are demanding some right, you should explain it a bit more and expand that section of why we need more right. And I'm pretty sure you need to put it in after introduction or in introduction, because it's like a conclusion, like a suggestion, and even from your presentation, it's like it sounds that's your main argument. You are proposing a new right. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. To answer.
Yeah, you have time to reply, or maybe other people want to ask or make a comment.
I just wanted first to say this is a very original point of view, usually on the subject. There is a lot of discourse regarding forgetting, but it was never presented like that. I just basically wanted to, I don't know if ask or maybe comment by saying that when you are proposing, it really did sound as if you are proposing a new right or indicating the need for a new right. And I'm just wondering whether it will not be better for your article to not to stress to this recommendation, just describe the theoretical field as you did, which was very convincing and very interesting, without the attempt to reconstruct, to offer us this new human, you can say it's human right. But I'm just trying to say that this was very convincing and very interesting, also without getting into this normative, almost human right discourse, like a standing point paper. Yeah, and basically saying that it is also enough, I think, to sustain a paper, an interesting paper, just with your theoretical analysis of the situation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for a great paper. I have a question. I think it's very intriguing that you developed this right to memory as a right to storytelling and writing your own self-narrative. And my question is regarding your statement that memory is more pervasive, as you said, in the digital era. So my question is that through modern communication media, we have more symbolic materials to write our self-narratives and to be our own biographers, and we have greater access to such materials. So the access to symbolic materials to build our own self-narratives is greater in the new media era, as you call it. But why does that entail that memory is more pervasive?
And one more.
Yeah, thanks very much. That was very interesting. Since you mentioned that forgetting is a component of memory, that it's active in memory, then the right to be forgotten would also be the right to be kept in memory, which I wonder, is the term forgetting the right term? Would it be a right to silence, or a right to choosing your own disclosure? yeah, I just wonder how that's going to play out. There seems like there's a contradiction there.
Yeah, it's very simple. I'm sure you're familiar with Nietzsche's discussion of forgetting and remembering, because Ricoeur also has a chapter on that. So I was just going to suggest, I think Nietzsche is wrongly coined as promoting forgetting, but I think what he is arguing is more like a balance of forgetting and remembering. He's like quite critical of the excess historical condition, so he's not actually critical of historiography in itself, but more like this historical culture. So I would recommend not just the unfashionable observations, but Nietzsche's other works to think them together. This is my point of view. And just like you were talking about different forms of forgetting that Paul Connerton is discussing, and you added one more. And I was just thinking, this is just to reflect on that. I was just thinking these new neuroscience developments. There were discussions about like developing. I can't really tell that using the right terminology, but it was about working with the cells to promote, to enable forgetting. So there are at the moment there are some medical kind of developments going on. I don't know. There is a risk of this kind of thing to be misused by the governments, of course. But there is such developments in neuroscience as well. This could be yet another field to develop, I think. Thank you.
Okay. So I have 2 pages of questions.
You have 10 minutes to reply.
I will try to wrap it up from Freud to Nietzsche. That's okay. Okay, I would thank you first of all for your reading and comments on the papers. They are very important. I will try to use them all. I totally agree with Freud that forgetting is not oblivion. And I think this is the theoretical foundations of all the discourse of forgetting in memory studies. And the notion of the fact that forgetting is not really about total oblivion, but rather it is a much complicated process of memory. Now in Hebrew we don't have difference between memory and remembering. It's the same word. So it's much more complicated in Hebrew to explain that issues, but in English it's easier because we have a memory process which contains both remembering and forgetting processes, which I try to elaborate in my paper. The Logos civilization, it's very, very important, and indeed in 2009 there is a famous book of Maylis Ferry, Delete the Virtue of Forgetting in the Digital Age, which is considered, and I'm speaking about it also in the article, which is considered to be the founding father of the right to be forgotten. Because according to him, what the digital era caused is a society without forgetting. And this is also an answer for you, I guess. We can, at least potentially, remember anything. We have an almost infinite amount of space to store that we didn't have before. And not, as private people and as collective as well, imagine archives that are becoming digital and then there is no space problem. So we became a society of never forgetting. And according to him, in 2009, we need to think again about the virtues of forgetting. And this has led the discourse that eventually brought in 2014 the European Court of Justice to decide the right to be forgotten. And this is also for you, John, because the right to be forgotten is the official name of the right as the court decided, and it was also before the court decision. I agree with you that it's not a sufficient name, and I'm trying to suggest that it will maybe be a right to memory. About the denazification issues, and we will never forget and never forgive, we have the exact phrase also in Hebrew. Today it's the Holocaust Remembrance Day in Hebrew, and I think it's still very common to say we will not forget and we will not forgive. And it's connected to the issue of memory and justice. And instead of denazification, Adorno speak about coming to terms with the past, which is much better process than denazification. And this coming to terms to the past, we can also find out, I guess, in South Africa, that in the Desmond Tutu's, the Committee of Truth and Reconciliation. First of all, it's about truth, about memory and the history, and then it's reconciliation. So it's a very important name. So again, this is what I'm trying to say, that there is a very strong connection between memory and justice. And as such, we should start and speak about memory rights. And this is the big opportunity of the right to be forgotten, that it connected two spheres that are not very common to connect: the memory sphere and the rights sphere. And this is what I'm trying to elaborate. Thank you also for your review. This pianist is now well known all over the world, so he was not forgotten at all. He is now the most remembered and notorious pianist all over the world. And I totally agree about the importance of the link rank of Google. And this is what I'm actually trying to say, that if Google is an official and established memory agent, so being #1 in Google list is much more important than being 114. But if we are speaking about memory rights, maybe we should start and criticize exactly this importance of Google due to the fact they are controlling the memory from their digital, the digital process they are using, the algorithms that are so-called neutral. If a neutral algorithm is defining who we are, we need to say something that something is wrong. We need to think how to deal with it. One clarification, that also in the right to be forgotten decision, the court says very clearly that it's not about approaching newspapers and asking them to delete articles. This is not part of the right to be forgotten, because exactly this is non-acceptable. It's damaging the freedom of expression of the newspaper. That's what the court is saying. However, it's not the same when you are speaking about the link to these news articles. And this is the biggest mistake of this pianist, that he asked to delete the article, which is not something that connected to the law as it is right now. I guess you all asked me why right to memory, and it isn't still a work in progress. This is something that I'm developing through my PhD project, and I'm also totally agree that rights are an important issue. We cannot just say, let's write another right, and everything will be okay. I guess what I tried to do in this paper, and also in this presentation, maybe I didn't succeed, but what I tried to show is that memory is very, very important to our society, as individuals and as collectives. And the fact that there is a decision of the right to be forgotten should tell us that many people want to gain a control about their narrative. It's not only about individuals, it's also about collectives. And I guess maybe we can argue about it. It's an important argument that control your narrative, control your identity is better than have no control at all. And but it's something to debate, I guess. It's something to think about more theoretically. But I guess that the fact that people just don't want the photos to be spread all over the web is an example why people believe that control over their identity is much more important than losing their control. So rights are indeed a good answer for this feeling of loss of control. But I fully agree that it's something that I need to elaborate more in order to make it more sustainable. I guess I answered all I think. Thank you.
Before coffee break, we have another presentation by Maylis Ferry from France, PhD candidate in political science. and she will also have 2 reviewers, not 1. It will be Professor Marek Kucha from Krakow University and Professor Vincentas Vobolevičius from ISM University of Economics and Management. So please also leave time to share with your reviewers.
So thanks to the organizing team for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to discuss my research at a very early stage, because I'm in first year for preparing my Ph.D. and a part of the material used in the work I present today comes from the study I did for my master dissertation, as I have started my Ph.D. fieldwork not that long ago. So what I present today is not planned to be a chapter of my final dissertation, not even a paper at this stage, maybe later when I have collected more material. It's a case I wanted to make for the denationalization of our scopes of analysis when studying memory phenomena. This concern emerged from my confrontation with the literature of my disciplinary field of research, which is political science. And this might also explain my very institutional understanding of the word borders in the title of the training school. Okay, so today I will talk to you about the mechanism of transnational circulation of norms on the past, which appear to play an important role in my case study. The study I do for my PhD deals with the controversy that occurred in France and England when these 2 countries decided to make the teaching of the history of slavery and the slave trade compulsory in all schools in the 2000 decade. Since I don't know how familiar you are with this history, let me just say a few words about it. So it refers to the massive deportation of Africans to mainly the Americas from the 16th to the 19th century by European nations, among which France and England, and the enslavement of this population in American colonies for mainly economic purposes. And this past is conflictual today in Europe because it tarnishes the national narratives, and while at the same time the people who descend from this enslaved population ask for the recognition of their ancestors' memory. This past was introduced in France and England, in French and English curricula in respectively 2002 and 2008, as you can see here. There are more information on this slide than what I'll comment now, but it was just in case we want to come back to the chronology after in the discussion. The overarching question I try to address in my PhD is how are collective norms about the past meaningful to build a sense of belonging and identification to a collectivity. So this very wide question opens several research dimensions, one of which being to try to understand the processes through which slavery and the slave trade were labeled as a past worth entering the very private circle of teaching contents. That is, a past worth being considered as part of our common history and to be taught to our children. So in this part, my concern is very about the processes of production of the curricula. And that's when the more specific question about the potential transnationality of such processes came in. Indeed, my case study appeared to be hardly understandable if we undertake the good old national scope of analysis. France and England are presented in the literature as 2 opposite models in terms of both education policies and the integration of ethnic minority into the national narratives. So we would have expected them to respond in different, if not opposite ways, to the question of whether the history of slavery and the slave trade should be integrated to the school programs or not. But surprisingly, quite the contrary happened, it integrated the school programs at about the same time and following the similar derogatory procedure. So in front of this surprising similarity, we could at least wonder if normalizing discourses on how this past should be remembered and transmitted through future generations may have been produced at transnational levels and may have circulated in France and England. But this is a possibility that an important part of the literature in memory studies does not really invite to explore, especially as far as political science is concerned. So lots of work there are still very nationally anchored. I won't expand on the literature now because I don't have too much time, but I can come back to this in the discussion. So even though memory studies more or less underwent a move towards a greater consideration of the transcultural dimension in memory construction and reception, the particular research stream investigating how the past is formally framed and transmitted through school largely remains nationally centered. And I think that's because they have to face a widespread consensus on the fact that teaching contents are a national or subnational prerogative. So because I found this national focus limiting for understanding my case study, I rather drew on a theoretical framework of scholars studying memory without any preconception about the pertinent scale of analysis. Here I mentioned a few. And a particular stream within the sociology of internal circulation of ideas that pays a great attention to the social positioning of the actors that bears the ideas. My study is thus an attempt to excavate the socio-political mechanism at play in the institutionalization of a conflictual past, so here colonial slavery and the slave trade, through its labeling as a teaching content without a priori setting the scope of analysis. The guiding questions of the arguments are then what actors played a role in the introduction of the history of slavery and the slave trade in French and English curricula. What representation did they bear with regard to this history? What kind of social configuration were they in? What types of interaction did they engage in during this process? And what consequences did it have on the process of institutionalization itself? So I'll go through the material quickly to fit in the 15 minutes. It's basically discourses of different kinds, archives, interviews, biographies, that I analyze qualitatively. I just would like to underline again that it's an ongoing work and that this data needs to be complemented by further fieldwork, especially for the English case. I will jump now on the finding that came out of the study so far. The first one is that the legitimacy of the teaching of the slave trade and slavery's history was to some extent framed in international terms. One of the main reasons for that is that the actors involved in the recognition of this history, mainly academic historians and political activists, were already in international networks. Let's take the example of the historians. There were not that much actually working on the history of slavery and the slave trade back in the 80s. Often it was because they traveled to Africa or the Caribbean that they were sensibilized to this history, so they had an international career trajectory. And as they were quite isolated in their countries because of the lack of trendiness of their subjects, and that they were materially constrained to share their data with colleagues abroad because the history they studied involved and connected different cultures, they particularly invested international networks. And besides, they were progressively backed up by international institutions such as UNESCO with its important slavery program, and later the Wilberforce Institute for Slavery and Emancipation, some UN programs, and the European Union financed EURES project. I can come back to this later if you want. So these, in turn, acted as socializing arenas for historians and teachers from different countries, including France and England, to share and normalize their practices of remembering and transmitting this history in a transnational perspective. The second reason why the history of slavery and the slave trade and its teaching was framed in international terms is that, as such, it had a legitimacy that was denied to it in the national debate. So that is only a result that comes out of my French case study, because with the material collected so far, I didn't observe the comparable mechanisms in England. So in France, commemorating slavery and the slave trade used to be very illegitimate because it breaks the universalist kind of national narrative whereby there is no such thing as ethnicities in France. And no ethnicities means here no subgroup within the national community that can claim to be a slave descendant and ask for the ancestors' memory recognition. But when the cause was framed in terms of international law, which condemned slavery and qualified it a crime, and international ethics standards, it appeared to be more legitimate. Now, the other major outcome of my study kind of relativized the first one. It is that the international framing did not lead to uniform standardization of the representation of slavery and the slave trade in France and England. I noted two sorts of attempts to renationalize or relocalize this past. First, in order to legitimize this past in a different way, and second, in order to discredit it. So the first case where this past was relocalized to legitimize it in a different way were made by actors who were embedded in local or national configuration and wanted to reassess their leading role in the institutionalization of this history. To give you an example, it was the case of two curators of two city museums in Nantes for France and Liverpool for England, for whom acknowledging the transnational dimension of this memory recognition meant diminishing their own local leading role in the process. So they tried to relabel it in local terms. On the other hand, actors who were very against the recognition of this past and its teaching tended, on the contrary, to underline that it was the product of small subnational groups who just wanted to be under the spotlight. So thus they pushed back this past as being theirs and not ours. If I have 2 minutes, I have two quotes to illustrate this because they speak for themselves. The first one is from the British National Party website, so that would be an extreme right party. And in this extract, they are referring to the introduction of slavery and the slave trade in the curricula. So I quote, I'm not speaking for me. The British people have a long and glorious history. But in Britain today, our great history and culture is being deliberately suppressed. British history is no longer taught in schools. And your young people have little or no knowledge of our great past and the heroes who shaped it. This is no accident. It is part of a deliberate plan by the traitors in politics and the media to rob our people of any sense of national identity and national pride. And in their quest to turn our beautiful island homeland into an Afghanistan-style multiracial slum, they know only too well that to achieve this crazy dream, they must stamp out everything which bound our people together and gives us a feeling of group identity, hence the ceaseless onslaught on our history and tradition. End of the quote. So you can really see in this extract like the mechanisms of identifying a group that is defined and othering this group and making it an enemy of what we are supposed to be, and saying that how they try to put their bit of history in our narrative. Another example is taken from a an extract from an interview with a French historian who was against the introduction in the curricula of the history of slavery and the slave trade for different reasons that I will not develop here. But so I quote, "The problem is that this law," she